Support comes from Prestige Imports Ocean Motor, located on West Colfax for over 40 years, offering new and pre-owned inventory and manufacturer-certified service, parts, and collision repair. More at prestigeimports.net.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from MIDI Health, committed to providing a supported path to symptom relief for women in perimenopause and menopause, offering personalized virtual care. Learn more at joinmidi.com. From BetterHelp, committed to helping clients with issues ranging from relationship challenges and goal setting to grief and depression. Learn more at betterhelp.com/public. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
You're listening to Code Switch, the show about race and identity from NPR. I'm Gene Demby. We've been talking to people in Dearborn, Michigan, the so-called capital of Arab America, and a traditionally Democratic enclave in a swing state, which looks to be much more
I wonder if they were in the United States.
That's because of how angry so many folks are about how the Biden administration, and by extension, Kamala Harris, has handled the war in Gaza. That's put people like Dearborn's mayor, Abdullah Hammoud, in something of a bind.
But you want to be inspired to come out to the ballot box come November. Nobody wants to come out of fear or cast a vote for the lesser of two evils. It's not inspirational, especially in the greatest country in the whole world. This idea that you have to settle
Are you hungry?
for a candidate.
But Mayor Hammoud isn't really inspired by the choices before him, Harris or Trump. But as a progressive Democrat, he also wanted to make it clear that voting for Trump, yeah, that's just not
That what?
Trump is awful, and the last thing everyone wants to see is a Trump
want to
presidency,
hear
on the record.
Okay.
But that doesn't really leave a clear choice at the voting booth.
I think for many folk come this November, the question for them is, they're going to try to vote their moral conscience, whatever that is. Each person defines it for themselves. I'm not here to define it for anybody. They have that quarrel of that moral dilemma of what to do. And again, I think apathy is the most dangerous thing. Apathy is what led to the Trump presidency in 2016. People talk about how Trump won Michigan with, by about 11,000 votes over then Secretary Clinton.
He says that in 2016, almost 80,000 people in Michigan skipped answering the presidential question altogether on the ballots. They just left it blank.
That is why President Trump won. That is what is dangerous.
Mayor Abdullah is aligned with the uncommitted movement, but is not a part of it. You may have heard of them. It's an initiative that started in Dearborn earlier this year by people who had once held various jobs within the Democratic Party, both in D.C. and in Michigan. The uncommitted movement's plan was to show the then Biden campaign that they were dead serious about not voting for the president in November. And so what they did was they urged people who were voting in the primary to vote uncommitted on their primary ballots, essentially filling in the bubble on the ballot that meant none of the above, instead of Joe Biden. Their plan was to get 10,000 Michigan primary voters to do this, right? When the votes were tallied, they had more than 100,000. In Democratic primaries around the country, around 650,000 people did the same thing. And this was a shot across the bow of the Democratic Party. And so, in the wake of the Michigan primary, the then Biden campaign began reaching out to folks in the uncommitted movement and trying to woo Mayor Hammoud. But voting uncommitted in a primary to send a message to your party is a whole different prospect than doing so in a close general election with Kamala Harris as one option and Donald Trump as the other. But there's another camp in Dearborn that has staked out a different position about how to vote in November.
This is a hot spot in Dearborn. Everybody comes here.
Just down Michigan Avenue from the mayor's office, closer to the east end of Dearborn, we met up with Summer Lookman, at a cafe called Haraz.
This is where I bring all my reporters for interviews. Sometimes it's at my office, but yeah.
Summer has run for state office before as a Democrat. She identifies as a progressive, and she told me that she wrote in Bernie Sanders' name in the 2020 general election. She just didn't feel like Joe Biden was far enough to the left for her liking. She spent years organizing to fight environmental racism in Dearborn, especially on her side of town where the air is really, really bad. I asked her what the order.
The Azmi Shai or the Mufawar. And then if you try the iced refreshers, the pomegranate or the dragon fruit are really, really, really good.
I was meeting with Summer because she belongs to a group that was originally called Abandon Biden. Now it's called Abandon Harris. That debate watch party I went to, it was organized by the Abandon Harris folks. The people in the Abandon camp share the same premise as the people in the uncommitted camp, that the war in Gaza has to end. But unlike the uncommitted folks, they were not thinking of their votes as leverage to move the Harris campaign on Gaza. Instead, they want people to use their votes as a cudgel.
If the Democratic Party does not wish to do the right thing, even after they have been begged to by some people, then I think it's time for us to consider punishing them and showing them in action, you're going to lose the election. We're going to make sure you lose.
But after Biden ended his presidential run, the Abandon campaign turned their sights toward its vice president, Kamala Harris, when she became the party's new presumptive nominee.
As Biden himself and she has said, there's no daylight between them. And that being the case, if there's no daylight between you, then I'm going to treat you the same way I did Biden. I'm going to want to hold you accountable, and I want to ensure your loss.
For the Abandoned Harris folks, their votes are vessels for their anger at Democrats. And Summer wasn't really hung up on how or for whom people voted in November. Third-party candidate, write-in vote, Trump, whatever. To her, their vote just had to be anybody but Kamala Harris. And Summer said she didn't want people to sit the election out just because they didn't like the choices available. Her thinking was that people had to vote because not voting could be chalked up to the difference, whereas a vote against Harris, that's a quantifiable thing. You can count that.
At this point, my
just can't be a
stance
pain in
is
the
and
butt.
continues to be that it is no
She'll sit
longer
there
a question of how can
in
you
the
win
door
me back. It is a question
and
of
won't get
how
out of
can
it.
I hold you accountable for the lives
She doesn't
lost.
realize that I
Because
can't see
that is
what
not
she's
something
doing,
that
and I don't want to step on her.
Summer and the Abandoned Harris camp are urging people to use their votes as a country, as a way
15
to
minutes.
punish them. But the uncommitted folks have a different strategy.
I believe my vote is not a love letter. I believe my vote is a chess move.
That's Abbas Alawiya, one of the uncommitted founders, at a press conference.
My family right now is frantically figuring out whether their son, their grandson, who's working on mobilizing people in the United States and protesting this awful genocide and aggression that is extending to Lebanon and other places, they're calling me asking, hey, do you think your protest is going to work? Because this is unbearable. So, excuse me if my priority is not punishing Harris. I do not care if Harris is punished. I care if our movement is well positioned to save some lives, because some of those lives happen to be real human beings who I know. And if you're willing to get some satisfaction out of feeling like you punished Harris, and that will help you sleep at night, I can respect that. For me, in order for me to try and start sleeping at night, I need to know that I'm blocking Donald Trump, because his plans are very clearly to enable Netanyahu to do more murdering.
I had to ask Summer what she thinks will happen if Trump wins, because that's the most likely consequence if her plan to rebuke Biden, Harris, and the Democrats is successful. And just to be clear, Abandoned Harris is not officially endorsing Trump. They endorsed Jill Stein, the third-party candidate. But Summer is personally endorsing Trump. Do you think that if Trump becomes president and the violence is still continuing, as you said, do you think then you will see an
Don
organized
really want to go ahead and do
resistance
that?
to the violence?
Yes, I do. I think Democrats will, number one, learn their
Snow
lesson
totals
that
from the other night.
genocide
Huh?
cannot go unpaid
There's
for
the
and
snow
accounted
totals
for.
from last night.
And they will see that
Aspen got 3
losing an
inches.
election
The biggest
is something that can potentially happen if you continue to support this genocide. That's the first thing.
Front Range area's got 1.5.
And then I think that will change some hearts. And then secondly,
Evergreen got a 1/2 inch.
yes, I do think
Fairplay got
that will come into play
3.3.
where they're going.
Floyd Hill,
Trump is
just
a
outside
villain,
of Denver,
and
got 3 inches.
he's a very
Kremlin
easy
got a 1/2
person
inch.
to make a villain. And so if he was to do anything in support, they would.
Nothing over
I
here.
know they would throw it back into our faces, like, look, he's
Gravity
supporting
didn't
genocide.
even
Oh, look,
hit me.
all you protesters that, cost the Democrats election. Look what he's doing, and they may come out and actually do the things that we expected them to do
Eagles
when
Nest
Biden was
Lake
still in office.
Got
So,
8 inches.
Potentially discuss an arms embargo.
Where?
Potentially say
Eagles
that Israel
Nest
is violating
Lake.
international law.
Eagle Nest now, huh?
I'm not gonna lie,
I don't know
this
where
felt
that's
a
at.
little like 12-dimensional chess to me. Like, for starters, you gotta believe that whomever wins or loses, they're gonna sort through the results and realize that they were being judged on the issue of Gaza. And that's just, it's asking for your vote to convey a lot of nuance and shading to the office holders on the other end of that.
Huh?
The uncommitted movement, on the other hand, is trying to work with the Democrats, and they're not really succeeding. Despite all the jockeying and organizing and the hundreds of thousands of primary votes supporting their cause, the Harris campaign hasn't really engaged with them directly. I mean, take, for example, the week of the party's national convention.
Democratic Party is actively suppressing a Palestinian American from speaking from this stage. We urge the Democratic Party to reconsider.
The uncommitted movement has spent months trying to secure a speaking slot on stage for one of their delegates, a Palestinian American elected official from Georgia. They even organized an all-night sit-in at the convention to bring attention to that demand. And they didn't get it.
Today, I watched my party say our tent can fit anti-choice Republicans, but it can't fit an elected official like me? I do not understand.
You know your
I
lights
do
are
not
on?
understand why being a Palestinian has become disqualifying in this country.
In the end, the uncommitted camp didn't win any concessions from the Harris campaign. So, what cards did they have left to play?
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you to members of the press for being here with us today.
All they had left was their endorsement. And so in late September, about 6 weeks out from the election, the uncommitted folks held a press conference.
Our organizing around the presidential election was never about endorsing a specific candidate. It's always been about building a movement that saves lives.
That's Abbas Alawiya again. He's one of Uncommitted's founders.
At this time, our movement cannot endorse Vice President Harris.
But they weren't officially endorsing anyone else either.
At this time, our movement opposes a Donald Trump presidency whose agenda includes plans to accelerate the killing in Gaza
Huh?
while intensifying the suppression
just inside
of
New Mexico.
anti-war organizing. And our movement is not recommending
Is that
a
a shore?
third-party vote in the
No,
presidential
so they got 8 inches. I
election.
wonder where they were.
So again,
putting that. I
what
mean, it is
options
just
in
kind
the
of
voting
across the
booth
border from
were
Colorado.
on the table?
It's not, like,
Personally,
super
for
close.
me, as a
South of
Palestinian
Trinidad.
American, as a mother raising Palestinian American children here, and as somebody who has, has family in occupied West Bank, every time I'm asked that question, it's like I'm being asked that question at a funeral, and it makes it incredibly difficult.
That is Layla Alabid. She's one of the co-founders of the Uncommitted movement, and as an aside, she's also Rashida Tlaib's sister. What was fascinating to me was that the leaders of Uncommitted who spoke at this press conference landed in such different places on that question of how they would personally vote.
Even leaders within our own movement will be voting different ways as it relates to this issue. Some folks within our movement will be voting for Vice President Harris, even through their pain and their grief.
And for me, right now, I can't make the decision to vote for Vice President Harris at the top of the ticket. But I also would never vote for someone like Donald Trump. His values do not align with my own values. And I don't believe in third party. Like I said, I'm a Democrat.
But right now, I can't cast a vote for Vice President Harris. What we are asking our supporters and uncommitted voters to do is to register a vote that ensures we are blocking Donald Trump. And so voters in some ways will have to vote their conscience, and we are laying out on the table what is at stake if we do not block Trump.
But Samra, the abandoned Harris organizer that I spoke with, she envisioned a very different worst-case scenario.
The worst thing that could happen is the Democrats win without our community. It's the worst thing.
That's because if Arab Americans abandon the Democrats, but the Democrats still win the White House, it would signal to the party that they don't really need to take Arab American voters that seriously. So her plan requires that Democrats lose. And Summer said she knows that a Trump win means putting a lot of other stuff she cares about in danger. Things like reproductive rights, things like environmental policy. And I pointed out to her that she was kind of taking this big gamble.
You say gamble. What am I gambling? If Trump was exactly the same as the Democrats, I've lost nothing and the genocide continues. There's nothing worse than a genocide. It's already being done. So I'm not gambling anything. The only thing I would be sacrificing would be the domestic policies that I really, really, truly value and espouse and have loved for all my life, from women's rights to minorities, exceptions, etc. The immigration policies, the corporate policies, environmental policies, I would be sacrificing domestic policies. But when I weigh all of those things against a genocide, there is no comparison to me. They're not equivalent. They're nowhere near each other. I would give up everything that I believe in for accountability for a genocide. Absolutely, 100%.
What I heard in her words was someone reckoning out loud with the compromises that come with being a voter who ranks one issue over everything else. Since our two-party system flattens all sorts of ideological expression into this binary, yes or no, Harris or Trump, any vote is a cosign to all this other stuff on the candidate's platform that you might not be crazy about, even stuff that you actively hate. But it also sounded to me like the bargaining that attends grief, like trying to make sense of this horrifying, calamitous thing that happened, or is happening still. Everybody we spoke to, everybody we heard from in this episode, takes their voting as a given, whether it's the uncommitted folks or the abandoned folks or the mayor of Dearborn. None of them, looking at the options in front of them, say that they want to sit this election out. They all believe that their vote matters, and I think tellingly, their vote seems to shapeshift depending on who's holding it, right? Summer says it's a cudgel. Abbas says it's a chess move. The mayor says it's an exercise of moral conscience. It seems like so many people, they're trying to push against the upper limits of what the electoral process might be able to accomplish. Because in November, the only mechanism they have to officially register their anguish and their anger over what's happening in Gaza and now Lebanon and Yemen is still just this crude tool. Their single decontextualized vote. That is our show. But coming up on Life Kit, how to get started with credit cards.
Well, a lot of times people kind of overanalyze and say, oh, well, all the features to be the best possible they can be, but 50-60% of those features may never affect you. So you really would just want to focus on optimizing the ones that will.
This episode would not be possible without all the reporting help I got from Colin Jackson from Michigan Public. You don't hear his voice in this episode. He was in all of these conversations. We were next to each other in every single one of them. Shout out to Colin. This episode was produced by Jess Kung with help from Xavier Lopez. It was edited by Allison Adam, Courtney Stein, and Leah Denai.
I keep it really
Our
close.
engineer was James Willis.
Iconic.
As for me, I'm Gene Debbie. Be easy. You're listening to NPO.
How do you eat that hot? You know what my latest deal is?
The past.
Losing my
is
hat.
the past.
Not the past. Losing my hat.
Had the audacity
It falls off my head, and
to make a bid for the presidency of the United States.
I set it someplace and go, where is it?
Fear history as opposed merely to knowing facts of history.
I'm Run Abdel Fattah.
I'm Ram T. Join us each week on Durban from NPR as we go back in time
To understand the present.
Saturday evenings at 7 and again Sunday afternoons at 3.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from JTV Jewelry Television, offering a variety of gemstone jewelry with more than 70 different gemstones available. JTV can be found on TV or at jtv.com. From Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates all from one platform. Learn more at indeed.com/NPR. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
This is NPR's Life Kit. I'm Marielle Segarra. I saw this meme one time that said, how is it that we were born onto a planet that has everything we need to survive? And I ended up with a credit score. Fair point, right? What we're about to get into, credit cards and credit scores, it feels overly complicated. And it also feels like a game. One
Yeah,
that
if I
you
never
might
bought
rather
that
not
car,
play.
I never had a poor
But
credit
since this
score.
is our reality, we kind of have to play the game. And if you're gonna play, you might as well win. Here's what I mean. When you open up a credit card, the issuer is agreeing to lend you money. It's also giving you benefits like cash rewards, discounts, reimbursements. Credit card issuers do this because on the whole, they're making money on fees from merchants, but also on interest and late fees from you.
They're not making money on every single customer. At scale, they're making money, but you can be kind of the aberration that makes money for yourself.
That's John Kiernan, the managing editor of the personal finance website Wallet Hub.
I can't see that
On this
cord,
episode
so
of Life Kit, we are going to walk through the fundamentals of the credit card.
I'm gonna go
We'll talk
outside.
about how credit cards work, specifically how interest accrues, and we'll also break down a credit
kid.
card statement. Talk about what's the difference between the minimum payment, the statement balance, the account balance. And this episode is great.
Oh, let's go inside.
Where we also